Thank you. Good evening and welcome to this evening's meeting of the Horsham Planning Committee. I am Councillor Ellis Brown and I will be chairing this committee meeting. I shall be supported by the Vice Chair, Councillor Peter van der Boer, and the professional officers. Thank you for attending. May I remind members of the public this is not a forum for the public to ask questions or challenge the points raised during debate by officers or members of the committee. You must not engage with the members or call out during the debate. If you're requested to speak, when invited to do so, it's important that you keep to your allotted time, and I shall be timing you, and I will give you early indication that you should bring your comments to a conclusion. Your comments must be material to the planning consideration that we are debating this evening, and you must keep your comments away from being personal. We're not expecting a fire drill this evening, so should you hear the alarm, please make your way to the nearest fire exit located at the rear of the chamber, and then we assemble outside the Lind Cross Public House. The members are voting. Please make sure your arm is clearly raised so the officer can accurately capture the count. And when you are speaking, please turn your microphones on, and when you finish, please turn them off. I also remind everyone here this evening to show respect to one another. And I'd also ask that you turn your phones to silent or other electronic devices to silent or turn them off. Before we proceed, could officers here this evening please introduce themselves, starting with the officers on my right.
It's Matthew Porter, Planning Officer.
Emma Parks, the Head of Development.
Claire Brown, Principal Planning Solicitor.
Melissa Stallard, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you very much. Do we have any apologies for absence or notification of substitute members?
Yes, so we have apologies from Councillor Paul Clark, apologies from Councillor Clive Trott, and apologies from Councillor Claire Vickers, who we have Councillor Josh Potts substituting for Claire Vickers.
Thank you very much. Minutes from the previous meeting held on the 6th of January. Do you all agree that I can sign these as a true and accurate reflection of the meeting?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 3, declaration of members' interests. Councillor Potts.
Thank you, Chairman. As the ward member for the first application, I appreciate that I can't vote, but would like to take part in the debate.
You're free to take part in the debate, yeah. But as with other board members, you will not be able to vote on those applications in your ward. So there's no need to identify to us, myself or the officer, that you can't vote. We appreciate that you are unable to vote. Thank you. There wasn't anything else, was it, Councillor Mercer? No. Okay, thank you very much. Announcements from the chair. Well, I just have one. I don't anticipate, fingers crossed, the meeting this evening will take longer than 3 hours, so it would not be necessary to have a vote on the extension of the meeting should we need to go beyond 3 hours, but I don't anticipate that happening. Okay, appeals. Any comments on appeals? Agenda item 5. No. Okay, thank you. So moving on to the first application this evening, which is DC 230189 Sandgate Nursery, West End Lane, Henfield. Could the officer please make the presentation to committee?
Good evening, members. So to note, since the agenda publication, there's been various updates and clarifications that have been reported in written addendum, which amongst other things clarifies the status and the weighting afforded by officers to the Henfield Parish Design Statement. That's the revised 2019 version. Also, alongside are details of the applicant's additional commitment to public access to some of the development and a landscape accessibility mitigation enhancement fund, all of which go to the weighting in the planning balance. Additional to this, officers also clarified that the nearest bus stop is located on Station Road, which is some 240 metres distant from the site and does have very limited services. It also acknowledged that the nearest regular service is at the High Street bus stops, where the 17 and the 100 services provide hourly buses. So in acknowledgement to this, the applicant has also confirmed that the travel plan secured in the head of terms could include the provision of a minibus service. And then finally, we've had one additional objection received, which raises no new issues not already covered in the committee report. So this is an outline application. The site shown red on the slide is in the parish of Henfield. It's up to 82 C2 and C3 residential units of accommodation, and the application includes access and related works. The council's development plan includes a settlement hierarchy ranked on the ability and the appropriateness to accommodate growth, and Henfield is ranked second from top tier. As the committee report evidences, district need for specialist care and retirement accommodation is not met by allocation alone. So on the slide now is the application site located on the south side of West End Lane, abutting the residential estate of Horsham Road. In planning policy terms, the site is adjacent to the built-up area boundary of Henfield in Countryside. Also identified, circled yellow on the slide, is Deers Farmhouse Camellia Cottage, which is a Grade 2 listed building. That's north and outside of the application site. So on the slide here is visuals taken from the applicant's landscape and visual appraisal, which assess the likely landscape and visual effects of the development. As shown on the slide are views from the higher ground in the National Park. And the conclusion of that, which is not disputed by the council's own landscape architect, is that residential impacts are expected to be neutral. On the slide now are impacts of the proposal in the site context immediate and the landscape sensitivities, which again have been assessed by the council's landscape consultant and architect. So it's recognised that a degree of urbanising effect from the development would occur. However, that harm, as detailed in the committee report, will be largely mitigated by existing vegetation screening, also supplemented by landscape buffers within the scheme, particularly the roadside and the countryside edge. This also includes public vantage along Bridleway 2583 as shown, and Lawyers Lane westward. The conclusions of the LVIA, which is the abbreviation of the landscape impact assessment, was moderate residential harm identified at most. And then this also will be further reduced by the applicant's commitment to the landscape fund as reported in the addendum. Also on the slide is the suburban influences on this immediate stretch of West End Lane with the presence of Holland Road and the Borough Drive developments. So as shown now on the slide is the horticultural nurseries, which are evidently redundant, with much of the site now overgrown with goat willow, scrub and grassland. This includes the existing buildings and structures to be removed. Outgrown treed hedging bounds the site to the countryside edge. So on this slide now is the site history, which is the site layout proposals over time. Past schemes have been refused on this site, but these were of a different nature, and with the built form closer to the site perimeters that face the countryside and the public vantage, and also the listed building setting. So from the current proposal, that's the indicative site plan and the parameter plan, two-storey built form will be set across the site with landscape buffers to the site perimeters. The parameter plan for approval shows the maximum extent of built form footprint. This has been informed by retention of boundary hedgerows and trees, including the root protection area of the off-site veteran oak, with ecology interests is protected and in response to the rural edge and safeguarding neighbour amenities. So on the slide now is the maximum extent demonstrated to be informed by the setting of a listed building. The setting significance has already been compromised of this building by developments of recent past, and that includes Borers Drive, to the north of the application site, a harm which the inspector, when he allowed that scheme, balanced against benefits. So with the current proposal, the siting of the development is a walk further away from Deers Farm and Camellia Cottage, and it continues, in the view of your officers, to be appreciable from public vantage, and as advised by the council's conservation officer, who identifies less than substantial harm at the lowest end of the scale. So on the slide now are extracts from planning policy which is relevant. So policy 1 of the Henfield Neighbourhood Plan supports proposals in the countryside when these are called with other policies in the development plan. And the important thing to note is that the development plan for this area is the Henfield Neighbourhood Plan and the Horsham District Planning Framework. So policy 18 of the HDPF, which is the abbreviation of the planning framework for Horsham, allows for retirement and care accommodation outside the built-up area boundary. So your officers believe that the proposal according to policy 18, the specialist care accommodation is tailored to meet local needs with an affordable element. Policy 18 applies locational criteria such as proximity to public transport or shops. The journey distance by foot to Henfield High Street amenities is judged acceptable, as it was for the 160 homes allowed at appeal directly opposite the site to the north. This is in the context of the nature of future occupancy and the facilities to be available on site, given this is a specialist care and retirement-led scheme. The improvements to journey into the village centre, as also detailed in the committee report, are an obligation of any permission, and also sufficient parking on site will accommodate need and demand. So in terms of the new vehicular access arrangements, this will be a formalised junction on the southwest of West End Lane with a separate pedestrian access linking into the existing footway, alongside traffic calming measures. The Highway Authority is satisfied that these arrangements can operate safely and without severe impact onto the local highway network. So bringing together all the issues, including those detailed in the written and verbal addendums, and in applying the flat planning balance as this proposal is judged in accordance with the development plan, the applicant submits mitigations to address material considerations where necessary, limit and reduce harms set against benefits, and brings substantial shortfall in specialist care accommodation in the district forward. So in overall summary, the scheme is assessed against national policy and is recommended for approval subject to the conditions set out in the committee report.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite the first speaker this evening, and that is Stephen Bailey. You need to, over on the, where it says speaker, and you need to turn the microphone on. And you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening. I live in Henfield and I'm a prime candidate for an extra care facility on account of both my age and my health. But not this one, because I would never want to move so far away from the shops and meeting places that I rely on for my independence. I'm also speaking tonight on behalf of the Sussex branch of the Campaign to Protect Rural England, because the implications of this application go much wider than one green field. Sandgate Nursery is one of the most contentious sites in Henfield's planning history. It has been refused multiple times by this committee, by planning inspectors, and by the Secretary of State when an appeal was called in. Whenever it has been assessed, Sandgate has been rated one of the least sustainable sites in the village. Now, Henfield has never argued against growth. We were one of the first villages to produce a neighbourhood plan proposing sites for development. It took years of hard work by volunteers and a recognition of that we do need housing, but in the right places. The current Henfield Neighbourhood Plan is adopted by Horsham and is legally in date today. It is formally part of Horsham's development plan, and this application should be assessed against that current position, not against assumptions or speculation about what might happen to plans in future months or years. We know that housing allocations will eventually have to be reviewed. We've not yet had even an indicative figure from Horsham. But neighbourhood plans are strategies designed to last for 15 years or more. They're not intended to be set aside as soon as the pressure rises. The spatial strategy in the Henfield plan directs the growth to the more sustainable and accessible parts of the village. And that should still carry weight. Otherwise, the years of effort put into developing and then implementing the plan risk being undermined. The wider concern here is that this application creates a precedent. As CPRE set out in its recent letter to the committee, if adopted neighbourhood plans can be overridden while still in date, then the message to communities across the district is stark. Participation and plan making will count for little when the pressure mounts. The planning balance is ultimately a judgment. Committee members have a duty to weigh the officer's advice alongside the community impact. Committees are entitled to reach their own decisions by attaching different weights to the various planning criteria. Other sites in Henfield are already coming forward for development, so there will be options and choices that need to be made. Being selective is not being obstructive. It is the essence of proper plan-led decision-making. So this decision is not just about one field. It's about whether communities can still trust the planning system to respect the plans they have worked so hard to produce. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite Robert Gordon, please. And you have, excuse me, 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Robert Gordon. I'm speaking today as a local historian, Chair of the Friends of Henfield Museum and Vice Chair of the Museum Management Committee. Henfield's growth
Can you speak a little closer to the microphone, please? Thank you.
Henfield's growth has always been shaped by its history and geography, and the proposed development would have consequences well beyond the application's boundaries. It lies close to the line of the former railway, recently highlighted by the Tracing the Rails project, which some of you may have seen, near the site of the historic steam mill and alongside routes traditionally linked Henfield to the River Ada and its surrounding countryside. These features paint a picture, literally, as several artworks in our collection show, of how the village develops and why certain areas were left open. The geography matters here. To the west lies the river and its floodplain. To the south, the steep escarpment facing the South Downs National Park. Between them is the historic core of Henfield, designated conservation area with over 50 listed buildings. Access remains narrow and sensitive. These constraints mean Henfield has limited flexibility about where development can sensibly go. Over time, the villagers learn where growth can be accommodated with least harm and where it cannot. That understanding underpins the neighbourhood plan's spatial strategy. It reflects practical local knowledge of what works and what does not. The neighbourhood plan's 90% approval is a genuine local mandate for development by consent, and it's an active inspiration towards local democracy. The location of the Sandgate Nursery performs an important role for heritage, landscape and tourism. Holland's Lane, which borders the site and which we saw some photos of just then, is part of the historic unpaved Holloway network. It's a key link with wellbeing and heritage trails developed with Horsham Museum and Horsham District Council. And I note the Welcome River history note in the officer's report, but the trail fundamentals must supersede a buffer. The Downslink long-distance path runs nearby, bringing in visitors who support local businesses and value the experience of the countryside integrated with the village. Camellia Cottage at the listed Deers Farm, which we saw, is one of the last examples in Sussex of the double loose farmyard arrangement. That form is not entirely lost yet. It stands in open countryside. One of the photos in our collection shows it with a Sussex wagon stood outside. Designated nature corridors are in motion, and the importance of this area's built and natural history to the mental and physical well-being of locals, visitors, and a healthy community identity should not be undervalued. This manifests in community engagement work we've done via the Arborea Tree Project, research into local botanist William Borrer. As King Charles might say in his upcoming TV series, we're of nature, not distinct from it. Development here would not simply affect one site. It would weaken the historic setting of the village, place additional pressure on fragile routes through the conservation area, and blur the clear distinction between settlement and countryside that has shaped Henfield for generations. That is why decisions here have consequences well beyond the application boundary.
Could you bring your comments to conclusion, please?
We have worked hard to make the most of our heritage assets. History and geography are not abstract concerns, but affect the social and economic well-being of residents. This indicates it's the wrong place to build, as this development threatens historic relationships that once broken cannot be restored. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Simon Wickenden, please. And you have 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Chair, members, I represent the Campaign to Protect Rural Henfield as a landowner and a farmer who has experienced sewerage overspill from Hollands Lane and field runoff from this site. I am familiar with the challenges facing this area. Henfield residents support quality accommodation for older people. However, extra care is effective only when residents can access services and staff can reliably reach them. This site does not meet these criteria. All existing retirement and care facilities are close to the village centre. This is intentional and reflects decades of experience in supporting older people. The site's location on the edge of the village raises significant transport concerns. There are no nearby bus services or shelters, and walking from the village centre is demanding. Residents with limited mobility will be dependent on frequent car visits from carers, emergencies and support services, further increasing congestions on the village's narrow historic streets. Existing care providers report difficulties recruiting and retaining staff as journeys from nearby towns are long and expensive. This site, with no public transport, limited access, and would further increase these challenges, potentially affecting the care models of sustainability. Moreover, there are also wider consequences. Approving this scheme erodes the boundary between the village and the countryside. A shallow ditch is all that separates the site from open fields. Disregarding the local plan invites more unchecked, poorly planned development. Two similar sites further down the road are already proposed for West End Lane, the domino effect that residents fear. The council's own evidence indicates that the main issue isn't land supply, but the build-out rate. For example, Wellcross, a retirement community near Broadbridge Heath, already has outline permission, an experienced operator and strong funding, yet progress has been slow. In contrast, this proposal lacks an operator and with no indication of a firm commitment yet. Additionally, a developer is already proposing to provide elderly care, on an alternate site closer to the existing services, and Henfield has a significant pipeline of housing, including 235 with outlining permission, 65 more expected under the neighbourhood plan, and over 700 currently in speculative applications. In summary, Henfield needs smart, sustainable solutions that truly serve the elderly, not speculative greenfield projects on poor sites that ignore the local plan and fail both older residents and the wider community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite Rosalind Gall, please. And you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the applicant. I would like to focus on one central point this evening, which is that this proposal is fundamentally different from general market housing. This is a managed, care-focused community for older people in a location that is well suited to this form of specialist accommodation. It will not operate in the same way as a conventional residential scheme. The development has been designed to provide a supported environment for elderly residents with a comprehensive range of on-site facilities and services, all of which are secured through the Section 106 agreement. As a result, the scheme is largely self-contained, with residents' day-to-day needs met on site. There will be no pressure on local schools, and it will not generate the commuter traffic that is typically associated with general market housing, with materially lower levels of activity overall. While a certain number of dwellings is required to support the on-site care and facilities, the units themselves are modest in scale, primarily 2- and 3-bedroom dwellings, designed specifically for older people. The scheme provides an attractive option for older residents to downsize, helping to release larger family homes back into the housing stock and offering a preferable alternative to elderly people remaining in isolated dwellings with limited access to support. Importantly, the scheme also includes 10 assisted living units, which were specifically requested by West Sussex County Council to meet identified care needs. In design terms, this is a low-rise 2-storey development within a site that is well contained by landform, vegetation and surrounding development. There are no direct or meaningful views from the South Downs National Park. The large area of open green space fronting West End Lane creates an attractive landscape setting which respects the setting of the nearby listed building. The proposal also delivers a range of wider planning benefits secured through the Section 106 agreement. These include the contributions towards heritage trails, resurfacing of a section of the nearby bridleway, and a package of off-site improvements to support sustainable transport. In addition, the development will generate long-term local employment, including care management, catering, cleaning and maintenance roles, providing ongoing economic benefits. In summary, this is a care-led, low-rise and policy-compliant development. It delivers specialist accommodation for older people, including supported living units specifically requested by West Sussex County Council, whilst also providing employment opportunities and meaningful community benefits, and respecting the site's landscape character and nearby heritage assets. For these reasons, we hope members feel able to support the officer recommendation and grant outline planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite Councillor Darren Gross-Smith, Henfield Parish Council, and you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Henfield Parish Council has consistently objected to developments on this site since the first application in 2014, which was dismissed by the Secretary of State. The Council argues this site is unsuitable for new developments due to its location, lack of transport links and inconsistency with local planning policies. The proposed site is outside the built-up area boundary, is not included in the Henfield Neighbourhood Plan, and is contrary to Horsham District Planning Framework policies, including those on countryside development, rural character and settlement expansion. It does not complement the local distinctive character and heritage of the district or integrate with the historic surroundings of Deers Farmhouse and Camellia Cottage. The presence of this proposal in the draft Horsham District Local Plan is inappropriate and random. The site in question could not be more different to a previously approved site in Smalldale, which has good access to main roads, local shops and multiple bus routes with frequent services. The site at Sandgate is rural, over a mile from facilities such as health centre and shops, lacks public transport and is adjacent to listed buildings and offers us limited landscape potential to integrate into its surroundings. The development does not maintain or enhance the biodiversity of the area, landscape character, or the historic setting of nearby listed buildings, conflicting with policies on green infrastructure and heritage conservation. The Parish Council would also like to draw attention to the Henfield Housing Needs Assessment prepared for the Neighbourhood Plan, which is still outstanding to 2031. This recommends the need for a modest number of additional care and sheltered housing units, noting no obligation for these needs or these units to be within the parish and emphasising the importance of accessibility and sustainable transport. The current local provision within Henfield includes 5 retirement sheltered housing locations, 2 care and nursing homes, a dementia care centre, all with regular vacancies for new residents. The proposed development of an extra care retirement community has significant deficiencies from other care locations in Sussex. The proposal is woefully lacking in the key components that you would normally expect to find in a genuine retirement community, such as predominantly low-level cottages or bungalows having 1.5 floors, a ground floor bedroom or study which could become converted into a bedroom, or the facility for a lift. Adaptable changing needs such as wider doors or wheelchair accessibility do not seem to have been considered. The provision of communal gardens and recreation facilities as opposed to private gardens in every house. They normally are exclusively leasehold, provide 1 car parking space per unit and not 2 with visitor parking, have age exclusive conditions, normally 55 to 60 plus, have a demonstrated need for the care and support which has not been shown. The claimed local bus service is negligible, running only twice a day as the bus leaves the garage in the morning and is returned at night. This service does not cover the West End location of this proposed development. The closest bus stop offering a regular service is over 1 mile away, which is contrary to the Horsham district planning framework. We also have concerns over the proposed medical centre as it's described as a support building, when the actual Henfield NHS Medical Centre is located over 1 mile away. This raises questions about its adequacy and fit for purpose, as well as staffing potential, as raised by other people. The plans and transport statement dramatically underestimates the ownership, movement and impact of cars to an already congested local road that leads to the main village. A previous development at Bishop's Park has caused significant overspill parking and traffic problems locally. With limited public transport link, it means car use will dominate. The current plan includes a total of 87 spaces, which along with care and delivery traffic, as well as the ability...
Bring your comments to conclusion, please?
The current plan includes 87 places, along with care and delivery traffic, as well as the ability for the properties to support family living, will exacerbate congestion on an already busy road. In conclusion, the Parish Council objects to this speculative residential development. The application is misleading and unsuitable. It does not meet the local needs or policy requirements for a retirement community. It should be refused to uphold the Horsham development framework and support the Henfield neighbourhood plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'd like to invite the ward councillor, Councillor Jill Perry, and you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. I don't intend to repeat the important points already made this evening. Instead, I want to focus on issues that link directly to them: sustainability, nature recovery and accessibility, and why the impacts of this proposal extend far beyond the boundary of this one site. I was a founder of Sustainable Henfield and as a result have been involved in nature recovery initiatives both locally and across the district, supporting biodiversity and green corridors. Projects like Wheel to Waves and the new West Sussex Local Nature Recovery Strategy prioritise this land close to the Ada. This approach underpins Horsham's own wider Horsham district's work on connectivity, especially relevant in the Ada corridor linking to Bramber Brooks. Sandgate Nursery sits within what should function as a continuous green corridor linking Hollands Lane, the wider countryside and routes towards the River Ada and the Downs link. Over the last 30 years, this land has effectively rewilded. That process has created mature habitats and ecological relationships that cannot simply be recreated through landscaping and ecology conditions, especially without the biodiversity net gain uplift. The applicant's ecological assessments focus almost entirely on what happens within the red line. Nature does not work like that. Fragmenting a corridor of this kind does not just affect one field, it weakens the whole network. That outcome in this key location would run directly counter to the Council's stated ambition to reverse biodiversity loss and strengthen landscape scale resilience. I now want to turn briefly to accessibility. The report suggests that many future residents will be frail and may use the on-site facilities instead of community ones. Yet elsewhere, it relies on reasonable walking distance and cycling access to the village centre to demonstrate sustainability. Both propositions cannot be true at the same time. If residents are largely unable to travel independently, the pedestrian accessibility is not a meaningful benefit. Experience tells us that many older people are unlikely to walk at least 20 minutes each way to the village amenities and bus stops, especially carrying shopping. We may feel positive about the recently announced minibus, but it is an unknown quantity. We don't actually know too much about how it would work. And so, despite the promise of the new minibus, I have concerns about this application being accessible. I believe it should fail against HDPF 18, as it's not reasonable to deem this an accessible location by bus or foot, especially for older or extra care residents. The traffic impacts also raise similar concerns. With 2 parking spaces and many staff journeys, I'm not sure that the traffic impacts will be lower. The report suggests that congestion at the High Street junction could be relieved by treating narrow residential streets as overflow routes. This does not mitigate harm, it simply displaces it and makes it a virtue of the conditions that residents already experience as problematic. Finally, I want to briefly acknowledge locals' concerns on sewerage and drainage. This area has experienced foul water flooding and increasing frequency of outflow releases. There have been 233 releases from the Hollands Road pumping station just behind this site into the Ada catchment since June 2024. Note that Southern Water have asked for the development at Sandgate to be staged to allow for an incremental upgrade to the system. While sewage capacity alone may not justify refusal, it does underline a wider point. The infrastructure in this part of the village is already under strain, and assumptions that impacts can simply be absorbed do not reflect lived reality. When you step back and look at the proposal as a whole, the conclusion emerges that the mitigation measures are incomplete, in some cases ineffective, and in others are based on assumptions that do not stand up to scrutiny. This application also sits in direct conflict with the Henfield Neighbourhood Plan, which I personally helped develop. It reflected years of community engagement and directs growth to the most sustainable and accessible parts of the village. Undermining an in-date neighbourhood plan in these circumstances does not just affect Henfield, it affects confidence in neighbourhood planning across the entire district. Members are being asked to consider not just whether this development meets minimum technical thresholds, but whether it genuinely aligns with Horsham's own objectives on sustainability, accessibility, nature recovery and community well-being, and what precedent it sets for every other community facing similar pressure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so there's quite a lot of points raised. Just on the issue around the design of the buildings, say there was reference made to ground floor disabled bedrooms, etc. And to an extent, parking provision and amenity plot division, those are all issues which would be principally dealt with at reserve matters, because that's where the layout and the design is fixed. So at this stage, we're looking at the principle of the scheme in terms of compliance with planning policy. We have got a condition about sewerage runoff, so that's condition 14. It goes back to what is sort of kind of a rehearsed response, in that we do have the opportunity to secure a phase-in and a progression of development build-out for the applicant to discuss with Southern Water and for us to agree through discharge of condition. There was reference made about, well, impacts outside of the red line. Obviously, I hope the committee report provides an informed assessment of those issues. And we are dealing with a situation of localised harm that's immediate to the site and its surroundings, as opposed to wider landscape harm, because that's what's been evidenced through the applicant's assessment under the landscape and visual appraisal. We are also dealing with moderate residual harm. So these characteristics of assessment don't respond to the test of national planning policy in terms of forming a strong reason for refusal in your officer's view, because they have been identified to be not to the highest ranking of severity under the assessment methodology. In terms of transport and accessibility, I think there's obviously a recognition to get to services within Henfield would require to walk some distance. We have got a suite of highway improvements which will help those less able. We do have a mix of abilities that would live and reside in the development. So there will be those where the distance would not be a challenge. Those early retired, more active residents. And in fact, we do have a situation where we've had that appeal decision of 160 homes, which aren't age restricted, so we're open to elderly people moving in and living there. And I'm sure within that mix of housing estate, there are those people of that age who feel comfortable in walking to Henfield. For those that are more, find it more challenging, we do have the offer of the minibus service within to be delivered by the future operator. And I think we have to recognise that for us to accommodate the district need, where there's an identified shortfall with this type of housing, it is going to be difficult to accommodate that within built-up area boundaries and within the centre core of settlements. There will have to be land released that's on the edge of a settlement, because in terms of being able to redevelop a centre, village centre site here, given the sensitivity as mentioned by one of the speakers about the core of Henfield being historic and the heritage assets that are scattered around it, and within it, a redevelopment proposal could potentially be quite difficult to accommodate in there. Although appreciate the neighbourhood plan has found sites, we are dealing with district need. In terms of the strategies that the councillor mentioned, a lot of those sit outside of development plan. They are considerations in the fact that they exist, but we are in a situation where there isn't that designation in place on this site. We've had an up-to-date walkover survey on terms of the habitat condition, protected and priority habitat and species, and the ecologist is satisfied that there are those mitigations in place. And we do have that extra fund to try and, although it's focused on West Sussex rights of way, there will obviously be some incremental improvements to vegetation along the public right of way, which will benefit species use of that important landscape between southwest of Henfield and the river. Yeah, so just as prompted, I'll go into a bit more detail about the policy and what ultimately this application will be assessed against. So I'll just move through some slides. So there was comments made about it being in conflict with the neighbourhood plan, partly because it wasn't allocated, but also because it was outside a built-up area. And one of the important things to draw out of policy 1, which is basically the overarching policy that sets the spatial plan for the neighbourhood plan. So this is like the fundamental policy that all the other smaller policies to deal with green infrastructure and design specifics are drawn out from. So this is going right to the core of the neighbourhood plan and whether there's a conflict or not. And we look at P12, and I apologise, the text is quite small on the slide, but it is reported in the committee papers, and it basically is saying that for development that's in the countryside, it can be accepted if it accords with other policies in the development plan. And the development plan in this case is both of these documents, these spatial plans. It's the neighbourhood plan and the Horsham District Planning Framework. So policy 18 is somewhat unique in that it separates out retirement housing and specialist care within its own criteria compared to market and other types of housing. So it's got two parts to it. The second part here is probably where you as members will be drawing your attention to, because the term continuing care retirement community is what is in the description and what has been applied for. And there's a slight distinction between the policy criteria for under 2 compared to 1, which is more to do with retirement housing and specialist care as a whole. So when you look at 2, what's important is under 2C, it talks about including appropriate services and facilities, including transport, to meet needs. But what it doesn't say or require, unlike 1, is that it has to be accessible by foot or public transport to local shops. So what it's doing is it's making a distinction between the provisions that would be expected to come through a care community, continuing care community, and a block of retirement housing within a town centre. So there's less, the main message is that basically less dependency on access by foot or public transport to those facilities. And because of that, it therefore allows for sites that are more distant than perhaps others would be expecting from retirement or care provisions. So the main point is it does allow for development outside the built-up area as a matter of principle.
Thank you. I now open this up for debate by members of the committee. Councillor Potts.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I want to acknowledge the public speakers we've heard today. They bring professional expertise and detailed community knowledge of Henfield and this village edge, and they together have addressed heritage, countryside setting, accessibility, ecology on site and beyond, and the implications of setting aside the spatial strategy. Now, nobody here disputes the need for older persons accommodation. The decision before members is whether this proposal on this site, outside the settlement boundary, results in harms that are clearly outweighed by the public benefits relied upon. And I don't want to tell you how to suck eggs, but I think it important to remind members that officers advise and members exercise planning judgment within the framework of planning law and are entitled, indeed expected, to apportion weight accordingly. I have some questions, Chairman. You've heard about the access issues from previous speakers. The first one, walking and cycling assumptions are, as you've heard, they are unrealistic for this user group. The acceptable distance test originates in general housing guidance, not in policy written for frail or mobility impaired residents. And the report itself states that many residents will be incapable of independent travel, undermining the reliance on the manual for streets norms. And the improvements listed to narrow Twittons do not convert them into safe, dignified routes for elderly residents, carers with equipment or emergency response. In regards to the bus routes, infrastructure does not create a service. Accessibility is about real provision. Now, a last-minute offer of a minibus is not really sufficient, and due diligence has not been carried out here. And this ties into the report where it relies on policy 18 at paragraph 616 to 620. Given the acknowledged reliance on mitigation rather than inherent accessibility, in what substantive sense is the site sustainable and well related as required by policy 18? It may allow extra care housing outside the settlement boundary, but it does not remove the need for members to judge whether this particular edge of village location, with no public transport, inappropriate walking distances, and heavy reliance on staff and service trips, is genuinely sustainable in practice rather than merely permissible in policy terms. Perhaps, Chair, I can just pause there to allow officers to respond, or would you like me to continue with my questions?
I'll ask you. The officers will come back on this.
Thank you, Councillor Potts. I think we've covered some of these points that you've raised, both in the beginning part and within the presentation. I think from an officer's point of view, it's a site that's adjacent to a built-up area boundary. It's within the second category of development as per our development hierarchy, as you can see in policy 3 there of our plan. You know, I think my colleague has mentioned there will be different levels of ability with those living there. Some will be able to walk, perhaps some won't. We've talked about policy 18 in terms of the requirements of that. So I think we've covered this point in quite a lot of detail. So happy if you've got any specific points, but I didn't hear anything that I don't think that we've already addressed, Councillor Potts.
I understand that policy 18 is flexible, but are members not still entitled to decide whether mitigation is an acceptable substitute for a well-located site? Because there are several locational weaknesses which are all far too evident. And policy 18 may be permissive, but it's not determinative.
Clearly, members can take a view, Councillor, and that's the purpose of committee. But I think we have to recognise the policy framework in which we're working in.
Yep.
Obviously, in addition to the policy requirements that we've discussed, there are some improvements in terms. Do you want to comment on those, Matthew, in terms of the highway improvements?
Yep. Sorry, I'm just flicking to the right side. I mean, the improvements that we have sought and secured are tailored towards those who may struggle, for example, drop curves, tactile paving. Appreciate the bus services along West End Lane itself are disputed, but the head of terms talks about within the village. So there is opportunity for those who have made the walk one way to possibly find their way through the public rights of way back to the site. So I think they are focused as best we can, because we are dealing with the improvements to an existing built environment. So there are limits to what can be achievable through realistic and proportionate mitigations that ultimately, if the fundamental distance is acceptable, and this is within the ability of some residents, perhaps the majority or less so, that we do have to be pragmatic and realistic to what can be achieved.
But so members can decide on the weight that they want to give to the sustainability of the site according to the policy 18.
I think if we bring policy 18 back up, we have to recognise this different criteria that my colleague discussed in terms of point 1 and point 2 and point C. I think you can see it better there. Certainly I had Matthew's head at point C earlier, but includes appropriate services and facilities, including transport, to meet the needs of the residents. So it is slightly different to criteria 1. So I think in an officer's view, the sustainability of the site is not key because of the requirements of the part 2 there. However, the officer's view is the site is sustainable. It's within the second category of settlement. It's adjacent to a built up area boundary. You have built development, which was allowed at appeal, I think, immediately to the north. You know, and it's a reasonable walking distance to the centre. I think it'd be very, very difficult to substantiate an argument that this is unsustainable in that context.
And in terms of the HDPF, the planning framework we have, and the suite of policies, it extracts out retirement housing and specialist care. So this is the policy which is determinant to this type of housing. So this almost sits alongside your overarching spatial strategy 2, 4, etc. And it almost carves out a particular unique criteria for these types of developments because of the tailored needs that's different to other growth. So it is probably the most important policy in terms of, or certainly within the suite of important policies when we come to determine the acceptability of the proposal. In principle.
Okay, in principle. I get, yeah, okay, thank you, officers. I think the interpretation can vary on that, but I'll move on to my next question. Paragraphs 644 to 645 state the proposal would end the isolation of Camellia Cottage and cause less than substantial harm, attracting significant weight. Can you confirm that at even the lowest end of less than substantial, national policy requires that harm be given great weight? And shall I continue my questioning?
Answer the question. Thank you.
Yes, that's right, but it also has to then follow on that balanced against the benefits.
And on the neighbourhood plan, is it lawful to reduce the weight of an adopted plan due to future uncertainty rather than apply it at full weight as the starting point and then assess whether material considerations outweigh any conflict? Because the report appears to reduce weight first and then find a balance to justify approval rather than the other way round.
Sorry, I'm not quite sure the thrust of the question, because we are dealing with something that's not a departure. It is compliant with the development plan as we view it.
Okay, all right, that's all. So you believe it is compliant with the development plan? Okay. It's the point being is that I would have thought it was the other way around. So it reduces weight in the first instance and then comes up with substantial arguments as to why to justify that approval. If you see where I'm going.
I still don't understand the question, Councillor Potts, but what I would say is we're not dealing with market housing here.
No.
So it's as we've explained, it's a different policy context. If you're dealing with market housing, then it would conflict with the neighbourhood plan, but we're not. And that goes back to policy 1, P1, 2, and then policy 18. So in our view, it's compliant.
Okay. Thank you.
And because it's compliant, it's a flat balance. So the reduction in weight is less determinant.
Okay. In paragraphs 1.17 of the report relies on the surfacing of Hollands Lane as part of the mitigation package. Can officers explain whether the wider planning consequences of permanently upgrading this rural bridleway, and that's beyond highway safety, have been assessed, particularly in terms of altering its character and removing an existing constraint on development along this edge of the village?
Yeah, so that was a sort of point raised by one of the speakers. I think the gentleman who worked for the museum or had some association with it. We do have to balance between accessibility improvement and also character of existing public rights of way, because as you saw from those pictures, some of them are characterful and create qualities of rural experience because of their sort of narrowness or the fact that they're not black topped or anything like that. So it will be balanced out with the requirements of West Sussex. So what would happen is we would receive a discharge of this obligation and details of what is proposed in terms of the improvements, and we as planning officers would look at it in the round holistically and say, well, it might be good for wheelchairs, but equally it might not be the most appropriate surface for the character of that particular stretch. So in the end, the quality of the existing surface is very poor. It's unmade. It doesn't drain properly. It floods in winter. There are pictures in the applicant's LVIA about the poor state of it. So I think there's some improvements that can be done sympathetically without necessarily urbanising the public right of way, but also serving better access for people who need that more cleaner level surface to use.
But can that not come into the cumulative consequence and therefore be given an element of weight as far as this is a physical change?
Officer with the view an acceptable surfacing can be provided that ensures the character is maintained but also improves it. So I think we're satisfied that an acceptable surface can be provided. Clearly that's up to members to choose to consider that matter. And
Chairman, if I may, a couple of last questions on ecology and the extra care delivery. Paragraph 6.6 to 6.74 rely on mitigation for ecological effects beyond the red line. What certainty do members have today about outcomes beyond the site? And can members give reduced weight to benefits dependent on future mitigation? And paragraph 6.16 accepts no identified provider, yet paragraph 8.6 affords significant weight to extra care benefits. On what basis should members treat those benefits as secure? Because if conditions can't secure an operator, surely weight can be moderated?
Thank you. In terms of an operator, it's not unusual for any development to come forward without an end, operator or builder or developer. It's not unusual. Clearly, what we can do as part of the planning application is secure the mitigations and benefits through the conditions in the legal agreement. So the fact that there isn't an end operator on board, in my view, doesn't carry weight against the scheme because the benefits can be secured through the planning application. I'll ask my colleague to comment on the other part of the question. Sorry,
you'll need to remind me of the paragraph numbers you were referring to.
As far as the mitigation for ecology, it was paragraph 660 to 674. And the extra care delivery was paragraph 6.16.
So paragraph 660 is talking about layout.
Sorry.
Doesn't go on to talk about trees, but the ecology section is further along.
Well, sorry, that was my mistake. But rather than rummaging through the papers, I think it is within the report. So 690.
Yeah.
Apologies.
Yeah, so in terms of off-site mitigation enhancement, it is limited by the fact that we can only put in and secure those if they are within the applicant's control to deliver or to facilitate another body to deliver. That's partly achieved through the addendum fund that was reported to you. Although it's principally driven by public right-of-way focused enhancements, because the public rights-of-way are often hedged, treed, and act as corridors for wildlife, there is potential there through West Sussex as the enabling authority to seek some better management, maintenance of the hedgerows along those public rights of way. The Heritage Trail, which is subject to the fund, is extensive, with going through various habitat. It goes right to the river, to the floodplain, the water meadow. It goes also through farmland and treed hedges there. So I think there's opportunity as part of that package to try and get some ecology betterment to sort of the wider locality.
I think fellow colleagues will be touching more on the mitigation that you raised, but so I'll leave that. And if I can just conclude, Chair, very briefly, I think that this judgment is grounded in harms set out plainly in the report: conflict with countryside and settlement boundary, harms to the setting of a listed farmhouse, a permanent change to the village edge, and ecological impacts extending beyond the site, and a location reliant on mitigation rather than inherent accessibility. Members are entitled to conclude that Policy 18 should not be applied as a shortcut around the spatial strategy. Members may also attach weight to the consequences of setting aside the adopted neighbourhood plan's spatial strategy. Taken together, these harms point to a cumulative sustainability failure, not a series of isolated issues, which members are entitled to weigh in the planning balance. If members conclude that benefits here do not outweigh the harm, that is a lawful, reasonable and defensible planning decision. The harm, as I see it, is clear. The benefits not so. An appeal risk should not distract from deciding the application on the evidence before you today. Neither the MPPF nor the HDPF Policy 18 requires the committee to approve development in the wrong place simply because there is pressure elsewhere in the system. Thank you for your leeway, Chairman.
Yes, I've been somewhat generous with the time. But just so you know, Councillor Potts, it's very unlikely that I will come back to you because of the time you've had. Councillor Mercer, and then I'll come to Councillor Trollope.
Thank you, Chairman. And here we are once again facing a proposal which is within an existing and current neighbourhood plan, different from previous ones. But what I want to test out and understand is that it seems to me from what officers have advised us that we have here an exception within an exception. So first of all, if one looks at the neighbourhood plan P1.2 as on there, this is an exception if the proposal conforms to, in terms of location, to the local plan policy. And we then look at policy 18, and I think officers directed us to paragraph 2 rather than paragraph 1 because of the nature of the facilities, which says large-scale continuing care retirement communities will be supported in appropriate locations, normally within defined built-up area, where they can be justified in terms of meeting identified need, etc. So everything else below that is irrelevant unless you define why it is abnormal, an abnormal circumstance, and why that is mitigated and justified within policy 18.
I think the difficulty is, Councillor Mercer, is we have had a number of continuing care retirement communities outside of built up area boundaries. For instance, there are two not long ago on the edge of Walbridge Heath. And I think that the general accepted argument, as my colleague said, is they are difficult to accommodate within built up area boundaries. And that general position has been accepted. So I don't necessarily think you need to kind of define a test of abnormality for each scheme as to why it can't be delivered within the built up area boundary, because that position has generally been accepted by officers and by inspectors in terms of how that policy is interpreted.
I'll also add that as it's been phrased in the conversation debate, abnormality, that's already in the policy, because what the policy is saying is it would normally be within defined built up area, but can be allowed where it can be justified in terms of meeting identified need and meets A, B, C criteria. So that is as it's been phrased, the abnormal test. You don't need to go beyond what's already in the policy. The policy embeds the abnormal test, because all it has to do, the policy is saying is where it can be justified in terms of meeting need, which the case has been, as your officers feel, made and evidenced already, and meets A, B and C, that is the test to allow for it outside the built up area. You can't bring up and imagine a separate abnormal test criteria. The criteria is already in there.
I'd like to add to that. I completely endorse that particular approach, because interpretation of policy is a matter of law. We're not entitled to read things into that are not there. Members, you need to confine yourself to the application of the policy and not the interpretation of that policy.
Thank you.
I'm sorry if I can come back. I simply don't understand that. That is not what English grammar says in that sentence. In that sentence, the normally within defined built-up area is in parentheses between two commas, and it then goes on to say where they can be justified, applying to the subject of the sentence. So forgive me, that's not what it says.
I don't think we'll pursue this for the moment. We may come back, Councillor Mercer. Councillor Trollope.
Thank you. I have three questions. None of them are, they're all sort of just detailed questions, but I think they do have an impact on what my decision may lean toward. One of the things I just want to make sure I understand in terms of planning, this whole application is being predicated on it becoming a facility for a care home or assisted living. That's my understanding. And presumably that will be run by a company or some sort of organization. What would happen in terms of planning and the use of the land should that company in the future go into administration? And is that something that we can actually, are we precluded from thinking about that at this stage of the debate?
So we're looking at the planning land use. So whether an operator comes on board and then for whatever reason goes away and another one comes, that doesn't change the planning use if it has the permission, which is the C2 and element of C3 with the 10 units.
Okay, so we wouldn't be in a situation potentially that they went into administration and say 5 years from now and then suddenly we have houses. The permission will be for a care home only until whatever year.
That's right. So it's the description of the development, which is what will be granted permission.
Okay, that's fine. My next question is I'm just, again, I think it will probably end up at best you suggesting that we can make it an informative. If it could be made a condition, I would be happier. I'm conscious that in terms of recruiting the staff that they need to run this, and I don't actually know the numbers, but I went to Henfield today for the first time, lovely area, but it doesn't seem very big, and I don't think there's probably a very large pool of workers ready to go in there to be cooks and care assistants and all the other stuff. Is it possible that we could at least put in an informative say that this service that they're offering should at least reach to Horsham train station? Because I think that's actually the closest major train station to Henfield. I might be wrong on that. Please correct me. But it just seems pointless otherwise. I mean, the bus system seems limited at best. A lot of these people taking on these jobs tend to have more frequency not having their own transport than other areas, just in terms of the whatever. Now, again, to me seems that, you know, having this limited service within Henfield, it's not going to do either the residents or the people that work there any good at all. But at least an informative.
So we can explore the extent of the minibus service. I mean, it's not uncommon for them to offer day trips out, as most sort of conventional care homes do provide that. But I think the point of the minibus is based on getting access to Henfield principally, but there may well be additional outreach to other settlements. We can put an informative on for them to see whether they can explore what the minibus service is. I mean,
okay,
if we were to approve it, it will be part of the travel plan to be approved, and I think given the interest around it, perhaps maybe we carve it out as a standalone obligation as part of the head of terms. And that will perhaps draw attention to the fact that we want to explore that minibus service in more detail with them.
Okay. Yeah, I realize it's not directly related, but I personally see that they're going to have immense difficulty recruiting the staff that they need for this. The last, I think at first glance it might seem like a bit of an absurd question, but I think when you think a bit more about it, it's a bit less so. And it would result in nothing more than a condition at best. On my site visit, I actually went and I walked across this field and I saw this greenhouse, and I was quite taken aback by it because it was like its own little ecosystem, literally within this building, this old whatever. It was quite different looking to the surrounding area. And I wonder, has it been assessed for any sort of like scientific interest? You know, this sort of, it's been there for, I think it's been there for 30 years, has it been getting into this state? And is it, you know, I'm not saying that this would suggest that we don't approve it. I think at best it would be like, maybe they should do a little bit of just scientific, at least a little look at it to see if there is any scientific interest to it before taking it out, taking it down.
So there was a walkover survey. Well, this site's been subject to several walkover surveys over time, but the most recent didn't really identify the inside of the greenhouse to provide a microclimate or sort of create conditions for a particular species. They would have looked at that as part of that survey conduct, because it's done by a professional ecologist. So they will look inside buildings. They're obliged to look inside buildings because of other protected species to understand whether they're present or not, like bats. So they would have investigated the inside of all the buildings, whether they were derelict or what. So
I think if that's been done, that's enough.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Raby, you had your hand up earlier. Did that?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and I'll come to you in a moment, Councillor Franklin, but Councillor Croker had his hand up just before you. Thank you. Councillor Croker.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to make a few points, and I've got a question at the end, really. So, sewage. I'm interested in the comments the officer makes in the report at 6100 in terms of we can somehow tie Southern Water into making improvements. I suppose one of my worries there is at the moment, Southern Water doesn't have any plans for any improvements in Henfield till 2030 at least. And that's despite the local combined effluent outlet discharging for more than 300 hours in 2024, which I think we've heard from some of the residents earlier, the sort of problems that can create. But that point is just a pumping station, and the actual wastewater treatment works overflowed for over 1,300 hours in 2024. So I'd already say the system's broken there. Anyway, moving on, looking at condition 14, I'm not really convinced about where it ties this development to having a functioning sewage system as opposed to one that Southern Water thinks is okay. So that's probably the first point I'd like to make. Second point is regarding the priority system on the access lane, West End Lane. If you look outside the houses at the top of Hollands Road, you'll see that they already use the verge there for parking. And I rather worry this is going to create a further parking problem for those houses there that don't have any garage or indeed off-road parking provision. I think the point about whether this is sustainably located or not has actually been covered by previous questions, so I'll leave that one. But what I am interested in is, and excuse my ignorance, I should have asked this earlier, what tenure would the residents have in this new development? Because I see that to qualify for residency, you need to have at least 1.5 hours personal care need, or one of the occupants needs that. Now, what if that personal care need disappears? What happens then? So I don't really understand that. And I suppose at the back of that is my worry that if you stood back and look at what's been proposed in the design and access statement as the sort of dwelling that might be built there, it does remarkably look like open market housing, given the point that it has an upstairs bedrooms, it has a stairway. It all seems rather worrying. So I was interested in Councillor Trollope's question there with regard to kind of what happens in the future. Perhaps the officer can offer some reassurance there. Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of the parking overspill, so there is some on-street parking evident on West End Lane, but I think as pointed out by speakers, there is a lot of parking provided within this development. They do meet the West Sussex standards that are tailored towards care provision. So in terms of the number of spaces per unit, it has been demonstrated that there wouldn't be overspill parking. That includes sort of visitors and servicing as well. But again, ultimately, we're looking at a scheme that's up to a certain number. So until we have the reserve matter stage, there is still opportunity to look at the parking provision because we don't know at this point where that quantum will sit in terms of being pursued at a later application stage. I understand your point about the wastewater treatment plant. I think the condition that we put down is common to other applications that this issue has been raised on. It might not explicitly tie the applicant to a timetable, but it's implicit in that the process of discharging the condition would require consultation with Southern Water. I understand Southern Water have a programme up to 2030 for investment in the treatment plant itself, but in terms of the drainage infrastructure that's directly related to the development, because the developer only has to mitigate the impact arising from their own scheme. They're not there to address existing inadequacies in infrastructure. That's for SIL, the Community Infrastructure Levy. I appreciate this is C2, so it isn't captured by that, which is just the way that the planning uses are devised. But in terms of the actual ability to secure the outcome that this development wouldn't worsen the existing sewerage issues, that is achievable through the condition. In terms of the tenure, so the way this sort of qualifying entry works is that it is a duplication of the scheme that was approved outside of Broadbridge Heath, the Wellcross Farm Continuing Care Retirement Community. And it is common for these sort of schemes to have this entry level restriction. That helps define it as a C2 use. Whether if the resident who has the 1.5 hour care miraculously doesn't need any additional care, gets evicted, that will be for the operator to manage, because the point is that your care will deteriorate over time, because the idea of the concept is that they're a cascade of care, that your care needs will increase as you age and are resident. So it's not the reverse. So that's why it's an entry level. So you have to demonstrate an entry point that you're at this care need, and then your care needs will only increase. And so it's a very unlikely outcome that you would get better and then asked to leave.
Councillor Franklin. Yeah, Councillor Franklin.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. There's an enormous amount of information going around in here, and I think the very last point that Councillor Potts made, which was that we should decide what we think the benefits are, what we think the harms are, and make a decision about the balance. And when I think about that, I'm finding it difficult to do anything other than see more benefit than harm here. In fact, I would struggle really to identify a reason that we could document for refusal. Is how that's where I am. I like the point about trying to secure more clarity on the support to mobility through public transport or private transport through minibus service or such like, and so I'd be interested to construct some sort of informative that directed us to that when it got to that stage. Also, the points I think that were being made about the design and construction of footways and pathways and walkways between this proposed development and the centre of Henfield, I think is also very important. And I don't know if we can also put an informative in around that. A couple of other points. Old people can walk and cycle, as evidenced probably by people in this room. I don't think we should make assumptions about people's mobility. I don't think it's right. Thank you. Hi, Dennis. And secondly, I don't think we should make assumptions about the ability of care staff to access their place of work by car or other means. I think that the recruitment and remuneration and the ability of getting people to work and back is probably a matter outside our concern here. Thanks.
Okay, I've got a few councillors. I will come to you in a moment, Councillor Livingston. Councillor Raby, then Councillor Knoll, and then I will come to you, Councillor Livingston. Thank you.
Perfect. So the point, it's very similar to what Councillor Mercer raised with about it being normally within a built-up area. And I know that that's not to protect the boundaries on the outside, but presumably that's also to do with the quality of life of the residents. So my experience of this kind of community is where my uncle and aunt lived, and the block of flats essentially they lived in was right in the heart of Lewes, which meant they were able to, as they got older and their mobility got less, to have the richness of life that they'd had previously, because they've got shops on their doorstep, they've got cafes, everything was walkable, even though walking was minimal. And although this is, technically in walking distance, that does make a big difference. And although it would be hard to recreate this community in Henfield, we're looking at the development and planning for our district. And there are other locations within our district that I think would work better and would be better places in terms of transport for staff to arrive and access to more facilities. So it's really the nub of that particular point, which is looking at it needing to be outside the built-up area boundary and understanding that precedent's been set and that's been interpreted as being okay because there have been similar things in Broadbridge Heath. So my question is, this is the site that's really not wanted by the local community, and we heard very good points about why this is a valued edge of community. And I don't know whether that is exactly the same as the situation on the edge of the settlement boundary, let's say in Broadbridge Heath. So this sounds as though it has real heritage value and natural value that might well be lost. And although you couldn't replicate that inside of Henfield, surely there are other locations within our district which could create this within settlement boundaries or where there'd be less loss. And that's where I'm at. I totally agree we need this, but otherwise, does this mean that this would happen? Like, what's the level? Where's the balance of what's lost on the edge of settlement?
So what you described where your parents live would be a policy 18.1. That's that typology, that type of McCarthy and Stone in the middle of town type of development. What's been applied for is 2. So there's a different set of criteria.
Sorry, can I clarify? No, they didn't. They anticipated the further needs. So when she had dementia, she was able to be cared for and live in that setting. So it was initially retirement flats, but within the space, it was exactly what this setting would have been. So it had care on site, so that you wouldn't need to move were you to need further care, which she then did for the next 10 years when her husband died.
Yeah, so continuing care retirement communities are a very niche type of typology. That's why we're presented with the site plan as almost cottages, because that is the product, the housing product that they sell and market. So they do not market or produce the big conventional care home scale developments. So that's why this particular development is separated out from other retirement types of accommodation. And just sort of want to make the point that although we have referred to Wellcross and others in Broadbridge Heath, what we're doing is we're looking at this scheme on its own merits.
Just to add to that, Councillor Raby, it's important to note that we're not considering whether other sites are preferable. We're considering whether this site is acceptable in accordance with the policy. So we need to be mindful of that. And going back to Councillor Mercer's point, I have been reflecting on what you said, Councillor Mercer, and I always find if you're not quite clear what a policy means, it's quite helpful to look at the subtext of the policy in terms of the wording. Now, I'm hoping this is helpful, but if I can just read what it says here, it says this policy does not direct this specialist accommodation to any particular locations, but sets preferred criteria that need to be met to ensure that such developments are in the most suitable location close to shops and amenities. This recognises the fact that while residents of retirement housing schemes in particular are often still very mobile, they may not have access to a car, and proximity to services within walking distance or on a bus route are therefore an important consideration. It then goes on to talk about continuing care retirement, and it says, continuing care retirement communities seek to provide care for the growing elderly population from independent living and sheltered housing through to full nursing care. The developments are often more self-contained and therefore must provide most of the facilities and services required by the residents, as well as opening these facilities to residents of the local areas. So I hope that helps in terms of in terms of what's the test. And my interpretation of where it says not to any particular locations, my interpretation of that, it means we're not saying it has to be within built-up area boundaries, but it's a criteria-based approach, which obviously goes back to what my colleague says then about ABC. I hope that provides clarity, but I thought it might be useful to read that out. Thank you.
Thank you. I will come to you in a moment, Councillor Livingston, but Councillor Noel had his hand up before you. So.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Chairman. I've listened carefully to what's been said tonight and the officer's report and the comments from all my colleagues sitting on the committee tonight. I still have a problem in my head about the whole concept of going outside the neighbourhood plan by using policy 18. Now, neighbourhood plans were created by the government for a very good reason, in that the people that know the areas best are those in the neighbourhood, which is why parish councils in the past have been given weight when coming forward with reasons in their neighbourhood plan for either turning down a proposal or supporting it. Now, we've heard from local residents who have all said that they are against this, and I can understand it. And I do understand that policy 18 may allow us to go against the neighbourhood plan. If you recall, 2 weeks ago, we went against another neighbourhood plan. Actually, it was the same neighbourhood plan, the Henfield neighbourhood plan, and we're proposing to do it yet again. Now, all neighbourhood planning relies on local knowledge. This area, we were told by the applicant that is being specifically built for older people and specialist accommodation. Now, again, with a cynical head on, and I'm not saying I am being cynical, but with a cynical head, I would question exactly the same reason that Councillor Croker mentioned, that do 2 and 3 bedroom houses actually conform to older people needing special accommodation? Now, furthermore, I've been thinking about this public transport thing. This settlement, or this proposal, is right outside the area of buildings in Henfield, and is about the very furthest you can get from the high street. The high street is the only area in Henfield where there's any transport links. Now, I understand that there is a bus stop, yes, on Station Road, but that's only for the returning buses, and the 17 now operates until 10 in the evening and starts at 6 in the morning. So I can't see people from the care home wanting to get on those particular buses. So there are no bus connections to this area. It is way, way away, over a mile away from the high street. No one is going to walk that distance. It's a kilometre. Okay, it's a kilometre. That's a direct measurement. If you go by road, or if you look at the road, it's up the top, or if you go by the footpath system, it's far, far further. Now, the footpaths in Henfield, and I know because I lived in Henfield for many, many, many years, and I've walked all the footpaths. They aren't actually footpaths, they're twittons in Henfield, and they're very, very narrow in places. And the route that goes from the proposed area up the high street goes through muddy little paths that go between people's properties, and particularly going from the bottom area of the proposed settlement going up towards the high street. It's very, very steep. In fact, there are steps in some parts of it, and they're muddy little twittons which are at the most a metre across. You cannot use wheelchairs or motorised wheelchairs to get into the town from this area. It's actually impossible. So you'd have to rely on public transport. There is none. Or you'd have to rely on relations cars. Now, I do understand that there is a proposed minibus service, fine, but we haven't got to that part yet. We're looking at the principle of establishing a questionable, and I'm saying that as myself, and I can be criticised for it, I'm sure, area of housing which is outside the built-up area boundary. It's not in a neighbourhood plan, and is an inaccessible area. If you go back to the previous pictures and look at the road, which goes, yes, the road that Councillor Croker, that's it. That road going past the parked cars in the middle picture narrows extremely into a single traffic. A single, you know what I mean. A single highway. You can't overtake. The only place you can overtake is in the interest into the Barrett's, the inset into the Barrett's estate, or far further down. Once you get past those parked cars, it narrows. So I can understand that the applicant's construction vehicles could access the area by knocking down the trees at the side and entering or making a new entrance. Incidentally, the housing that's shown to the north of this area was only accessed where that blue arrow is pointing, the first top right blue arrow, which is the area which is a car park now, which was the only access into the area when it was being built. There is no similar access for this particular proposal. So the more I talk, I'm talking myself out of hoping that I would actually approve this now. I've just talked myself out of it. So there are many, many questions in my head about this proposal. I could go on, but I'm being looked at by the chairman, so I better shut up now. Thank you.
Chair, I would like to just remind members that the neighbourhood plan does not represent a bar to development beyond the built-up area boundary. We go back to policy 1.2, development proposals outside of these boundaries will be supported, and then I'm going to stop reading there because then it sets out criteria for when that would be acceptable. So I don't want to hear any more about this being a bar. It is not. It does not speak in terms of absolutes at all. I know that you went on to make plenty of justification points, but I don't want this to be forming part of our mindset that it's somehow an absolute bar. There is justification for development beyond the built-up area boundary. It's just how we go about that, and that's application of that policy. But as far as interpretation goes, you cannot read it in that way at all. It's just not possible.
That's also why we're not saying it's against or overriding the neighbourhood plan, because P1.2 allows for development outside the built-up area, subject to compliance in accordance with all the other development plan policies. Also, there's quite a lot of focus about the bus stops. I just wanted to clarify, 18.1 does talk about public transport, but 18.2C says transport. So it doesn't make that same distinction, because the point is that continuing care retirement community offers a level of service, i.e. the minibus, that or other types of private means of transport, because that's the type of market product that is a result of that type of housing. So there is a distinction between the two types of retirement accommodation, and that's explicit in the policy. So it's just on the debate around bus servicing, and that's why the minibus offer is ahead of term that's been put forward at this point, because it's critical to the acceptability under C.
No, I'm going to come. You can admit, Councillor Livingston. Then I'll come to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I am a supporter of neighbourhood plans, having sat on the committee with developing one which took a number of years to do so. We've heard also from the parish councillor, and I suspect they feel like they're being let down if we don't support this, but before the solicitor comes in, their policy 1.2 in the HNP states, according to this report, it explicitly supports development outside of the built-up area where this would conform as appropriate to its location. Now, how do we decide if it's appropriate? Now, we've heard a lot of information here. Is it really appropriate? I've listened very carefully, and I cannot, in my own heart, put this down to being an appropriate site for development. So, members, we have a choice. Do we support the neighbourhood plan based on inappropriateness of the site, which isn't in their development plan, or do we go along with the officer's recommendation? Thank you.
Just very quickly, because I'm conscious of the time, I can understand members' concerns, but I'm struggling to see how any of the points that have been made substantiates a reason for refusal that can be defended at appeal. Look at the map here. You have a site adjacent to the built-up area boundary on a Category 2 settlement within a reasonable proximity to the settlement. How do we substantiate an argument and defend it at appeal in terms of that point? And my colleague has also mentioned the different criteria for the continuing care communities. I do really recognise there is local concern. I recognise there is perception it's contrary to the neighbour plan, and clearly I hope we've demonstrated it's not in terms of the principle. I'm really struggling to see how these arguments are not defensible in my view. I've not heard anything that I feel is defensible. I do recognise it's a very challenging decision, but clearly if it's refused, we have to be able to defend it at appeal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Vanderbilt.
Yeah, just on the minibus. I mean, can we turn an offer into something a little bit more secure than that?
That's a very good point, Councillor Vanderberg. And if members feel that the further information is needed on the minibus or in terms of the provision of the minibus per se, that could inform kind of your perhaps an amended motion in terms of, as my colleague said, it being explicit heads of terms within the legal agreement. So that's possible. Obviously, if that's key to your assessment of the scheme being acceptable, then there is scope there to kind of beef that up, for want of a better phrase. Thank you.
I want to clarify something.
Okay, yeah, I'll,
Want to help you out there?
he doesn't want it.
He does.
So wanted to ask the officers if we could consider one small condition.
What is the condition before we consider it?
If it's appropriate, that it's prior to occupation, that a local impact mitigation scheme could be submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority, identifying specific deliverable measures directly related to the impacts of the development, prepared following consultation with the parish council and ward members, with final approval resting with the local planning authority, if something like that is possible.
As my colleague said, in planning terms, you can only secure what's within the applicant's ownership and control. So that's why conditions relate to what's within the red edge. Obviously, in addition to that, we've got the commuted sum for landscaping. So, you know, I'm not quite sure, you can't have a condition that relates to something outside of the application site. You'd have to secure it by a legal agreement. I've no idea what is you're seeking. So my view is, on that basis, it doesn't meet the tests for an obligation or a condition. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, councillor.
Yeah, okay, well, we'll move the motion, as is with the provision in the 106 for
Oh, well, are you proposing an addition?
addition.
Proposing
Sorry.
an addition.
Yeah.
We're proposing an addition to the recommendation in the committee report, which will Councillor Vanderbilt will explain.
Comprising a head of term to secure minibus transport to the site, no?
Well, at the site.
Well, to and from the site
Yeah,
to...
to and from the site.
Councillor Lambert might help you there.
Site to town and other trips, day trips. You know,
Sounds very vague.
good and vague. Well, really about the minibus, isn't it? How they actually end up using it is, they'll have to work on that themselves.
Yeah,
We need to capture some accurate words here.
Can I? Thank you, Chairman. Or an alternative legal colleague, if you think this would be appropriate for Section 106, is to require the provision of a minibus as per the heads of terms in the legal agreement, but the discharge of the obligation shall be in consultation with Chair, Vice Chairman, or something along those lines. Therefore, the exact, because what I don't want us to be going to a big debate about the bus should go here, there and everywhere. I think that needs to be a matter of discussion, but clearly I recognise members may wish to be involved in that. So my understanding of Councillor Vanderberg's motion is that it's an additional requirement within the Section 106 legal agreement to provide a minibus, with the details of that exact provision to be submitted.
I said, yeah, minibus service, actually, I'd
Service.
say minibuses.
Minibuses.
Well, I mean, I'm talking about plant and machinery.
Minibus service.
Could be multiple buses.
Okay, minibus service. That could include one minibus or multiple
Does
minibuses.
that include does that include
We're just going to take a very quick break while we confirm the wording of this additional element to the recommendation. I read all of this? Okay, so I am going to the vote on this particular application. And the recommendation is to approve outline planning permissions subject to appropriate conditions and completion of the necessary section 106 agreement within 4 months of the decision of this committee, or such longer period as agreed by the director of a place acting reasonably and properly, with the addition of
An additional heads of terms relating to the provision of a minibus service, details to be submitted and agreed in consultation with the chair and vice chairman of the planning committee.
Okay, all right, sorry, we're going to change that. Taking legal advice. Okay, no, it's what you're here for. If you read out this additional, this addition to the recommendation, and we read it out, please.
Yep, so we're voting on this alone, which is the addition of a heads of terms relating to the provision of a minibus service, details to be submitted and agreed in consultation with the chair and vice chairman of planning committee.
Councillor Vanderbilt? Yeah. Okay, do I have a seconder? Okay, yeah. Councillor Lambert, Councillor Frank, all those in favour, please show.
Ten for.
All those against? Any abstentions?
2 abstentions.
Okay, therefore that will be added to the heads of terms. Going back to the recommendation, is to approve outline planning permissions subject to appropriate conditions and the completion of necessary section 106 agreement within 4 months of the decision of this committee, or such longer period as agreed by the director of place acting reasonably and properly. All those in favour, please show.
Seven in favour.
All those against?
4 against.
Any abstentions?
And 1 abstention.
Okay. What was sorry, 4-1.
4-1.
Okay, thank you. Therefore, the recommendation has been approved. Thank you very much. Okay, members of the public, if you wish to leave, you can do so. Gosh, what's the time now? 7, 2 hours. Counts. Right, I am going to put the timer on this. I've got it in front of me. If members would like to take a 2-minute comfort break.
I think you're going to want to start moving your
Thank you. Moving on to the next agenda item is DC 250561, Unit 1, Horsham Trade Park, Foundry Lane, Horsham. Could the officer please make a presentation to the committee? Thank you.
Thank you, members. So as shown on the slide, this application for a business unit in an established key employment area within the town of Horsham returns to committee. It follows receipt of a noise impact assessment from the applicant. And as a further 7 letters of objection have also been received since the application was last considered by yourselves in July last year. So following review of the submitted noise assessment, the council's environmental health team has advised planning officers on noise disturbance, and that's detailed out in the committee report. Additionally, the council's environmental health team has investigated noise levels from neighbouring properties in recent weeks. Evident from this was that the existing business is operating during night time and during Sundays, with environmental health concluding disturbance had arisen from this. So both the noise assessment and the council's environmental health investigations support the evidence of existing disturbance from late night and Sunday working provided by the residents. Therefore, environmental health recommends the amended condition as shown on the slide. This being no earlier than 8 AM and no work on Sundays and public bank holidays. So this condition, alongside the suite of other amended operational limitations, would, in your officer's view, safeguard neighbour amenity sufficiently in terms of the test of planning policy, which is not to duplicate matters capable of control under other legislation, whilst also allowing an occupying B8 storage business to run properly, and the application is therefore recommended for approval.
Thank you very much. I'd like to call the first public speaker, which is Malcolm Deacon, please. You have 3 minutes. Thank you. If you could turn the microphone on, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. My name is Malcolm Deacon. I've lived in Crawford Gardens for 27 years in a property backing directly onto the yard occupied by FFS. And I've always been accepting of the fact that we have to tolerate some level of noise from the adjoining industrial area. When this application last came to the committee 6 months ago, we highlighted the fact that the noise report had not been produced for the change of use B2 to B8, as required by the planning noise advice document for Sussex. We consider this particularly necessary in view of the large number of complaints and objections to the applications that have been made over 2 years relating to both the levels of noise disturbance created by the applicant's business and the hours that they wish to work. For over 30 years, as both B2 and B8 usage, the condition has always been applied that no activities and vehicle movements are permitted outside the hours 8 AM to 6 PM on weekdays and 8 AM to 1 PM on Saturdays, and with no working on Sundays or bank holidays. For the reasons of safeguarding our amenity as residential neighbours in accordance with Policy 33 of the Horsham District Planning Framework. The business wishes to open earlier in the morning and also to work on Sundays and bank holidays, and indeed has done so without permission since taking over the unit. With neighbouring units allowed to work on Saturday mornings, industrial activity is therefore a 365 day per year occurrence, providing no days of respite from noise disturbance and stress to us as residents. We are pleased that the Planning Authority have undertaken their own truly impartial study into the noise disturbances caused, and that the results and conclusions reached independently corroborate the reasons for our complaints and objections to the applicant's activities over the last 2 years. We note the recommendation in the Planning Officer's report and the historical regulatory condition relating to the operation hours related about earlier should be retained, with no working on Sundays and bank holidays, and we now respectfully ask that this condition is endorsed by the committee.
We do, however, have reservations as to whether the applicant's business will comply with the condition, as they seem unable to even adhere to the hours restrictions that they themselves have requested, with frequent loading and dispatching activities during the evenings and at night, and regularly working well beyond the 1 p.m. closing time at weekends. This is all evidenced in our detailed submissions to complaint number EN 25/0035 that we've been providing to the Planning Officer, Planning Compliance and Environmental Health since last October. We therefore would ask that the committee to task the relevant department to ensure that the regulatory condition recommended in the report, together with some measures to limit the levels of noise during working hours, is rigorously enforced in order to preserve our amenity as neighbouring residents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite Hazel Wright. And you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair. My name is Hazel Wright and I am a resident of Crawford Gardens. As a result of our previous objections to the application, a noise report has been produced, and we welcome the Environmental Health Officer's recommendations that there be no operations on Sundays and bank holidays. We would urge that this recommendation is enforced with immediate effect. However, we still have considerable reservations about whether the company will adhere to these restrictions, as they continue to operate out of hours and frequently cause considerable disturbance to us. Whilst we've always accepted a reasonable degree of noise since our property's back onto Unit 1, we continue to find that the outdoor nature of most of the work, loading and unloading, still takes place not in the warehouse itself, but in the forecourt parking areas, which is now like a heavy-duty haulage hub more than a car park. This is far too close to our properties, only feet away from our fences. The space is echoey, as evidenced in the noise report, and involves enormous articulated lorries with engines running, movement of metal trolleys banging, and lights shining into our properties, all of which are extremely intrusive and prevent us from enjoying our homes, especially our gardens. Despite our frequent noise complaints since 2023, very little has changed in a unit where operational hours and practices were previously enforced. We would welcome the strict enforcement of the operational hours and also seek the placement of effective screening for noise and light on the boundary of the property, as other businesses in the Foundry Lane Industrial Park have been required to install. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite Claire Mittendorfer, and apologies if I mispronounced your name. You two have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Claire Mittendorfer. I live at number 9 Crawford Gardens. I am also here regarding this application, and I apologise if I repeat some of my neighbours' comments. We attended the previous committee meeting where we clearly outlined the disruption already caused by the current occupants of Unit 1 Foundry Lane. These issues have been detailed repeatedly in our written submissions, and my neighbours have previously described the extent of the noise and disturbance here in person. My family and I have lived in Crawford Gardens for over 20 years, and during that time we've become fully accustomed to the activity associated with Foundry Lane. We have never expected complete quiet. However, what has enabled us to coexist has been the long-standing protection of the established operating restrictions. In particular, no early morning or late night activity, and none on Sundays and bank holidays. Our primary objection is the applicant's request to extend their hours of operation, given that they already generate persistent noise and disruption. I first contacted Horsham District Council in October 2023 to report that the new occupants of Unit 1 were disregarding permitted hours and that noise levels had become intolerable. Since then, residents of Crawford Gardens have raised these issues multiple times, either directly with Environmental Health or through this planning application process. Yet throughout this entire period, the applicant has continued activities without consequence. We would like to think that the applicant was made aware of the hours of operation associated with the unit before selecting these premises and commencing their lease. We appreciate that the business appears successful and growing, but with this growth brings increasing noise and operational impact. What worries us most is that the current repeated breaches of permitted hours have gone unchallenged. This raises a very real concern that if extended hours are granted, the pattern of non-compliance may simply continue. At the previous meeting, the committee deferred its decision regarding a noise assessment. The first assessment, organised by the applicant, did not reflect the true level or nature of disruption experienced by surrounding residents. We are therefore grateful that a more relevant and impartial assessment has since been carried out by Environmental Health. We fully support all their professional recommendations and endorse retaining the existing hours of operation, which are 8 to 6 Monday to Friday, 8 to 1 p.m. on Saturdays, and no operation on Sundays or bank holidays. Given the long history of disturbance, the documented pattern of non-compliance and the clear findings of the Council's own environmental officers, I sincerely hope the committee supports their expert recommendation and preserves the protections that residents have relied upon for decades. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'd like to invite Alex Mosley, and you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening. I would like to thank the Chair for allowing me to speak on behalf of the applicant tonight. The applicant has accepted that the Council's request for further noise information in order to allay concerns raised by local residents that join the business park. As such, a reputable consultancy was appointed to monitor and to consider noise levels at the site. I understand, obviously, the Council's environmental team have also been involved there. The applicant has never sought to create conflict with neighbouring residents and has gone to the extreme lengths of securing rent on an alternative premises, which will be available within a month elsewhere in the district, which will move a majority of operations away from obviously Sunday operations. So yeah, this undoubtedly would offer respite to those living nearby when there is no present duty to do so. Applicants would have the assurance of the binding hours of operation sooner had the applicant been able to consider the application on delegated powers. I'm informed that the working pattern of the business will now be adjusted since the new premises will be acquired very shortly. The suggested hours of operation by the Council's own environmental officers are acceptable to the applicant. This should bring closure to the issues raised by local residents, as the decision on the first application for the change of use had raised no such concerns by officers. With there currently being no fixed hours of operation, it has been difficult to control noise, understandably, from the Council's perspective. However, local residents can now receive the assurance needed that hours will be controlled through approval of this application. It is important to note that the condition limiting hours of operation is reflective of the 2006 permission that introduced the B2 use to the site, and more importantly, would also bring the use aligned with the original use of the unit, which I understand was B8. I would therefore kindly request that members look to support the officer's recommendation and grant planning permission subject to the recommended planning conditions.
Thank you very much. Okay. Councillor Raby, I'll come to you in a moment. Councillor Franklin. Councillor Raby, yes.
Yeah, obviously, as I won't be voting, I'm the ward member. I've been to see this site a lot, Chair, and I really understand the strong feeling of the residents, and it's very pleasing to see we've arrived at a conclusion with the environmental health to look at the amenity, which really I could see was being impacted, and it's nice to see that reflected in this new recommendation, the new report from the team at planning. So I really welcome the changes, and it's nice to see both sides come together and agree that this is the way forward. And it sounds as though the new hours, if the committee's happy to go along and vote that, which I'd strongly recommend, that both sides, and hopefully this will enable the business to operate successfully, but the amenity to be protected. Should another operator, I'm sure that this operator now have promised that they will reduce their hours, but another operator who was to take it on with these conditions would stick to those hours. So I think this is a really good conclusion. I won't go on and take my minutes, just to say I hope everyone supports it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Franklin, yes.
Yes, I think we were guilty at the last one, or I felt that we were guilty at the last meeting in July of kicking this one down the road unnecessarily. I think we could have come to this conclusion at that meeting, but I think it was getting to the end of the meeting, and I remember Councillor Croker quite logically and in the end, I think correctly proposed that we do these noise assessments, which in the end have turned out to be very conclusive in that there is an issue that does need to be resolved. So I don't think we need to waste too much time, hopefully. I like the idea from one of the residents about the possibility of acoustic screening and whether that might still be something we would want to condition or advise, because the site still will be operating in normal business hours. And I don't know if there's any enthusiasm for that one. Enforcement probably shouldn't be an issue, but we need to take note of that. And yeah, I mean, it sounds like the applicant's quite logically, I suppose, if they need to do distribution out of airports on Mondays, then they need to work on Sundays, so they're going to have to find somewhere else. So I think that's what's happening there.
The only thing I would say is that obviously if environmental health considered acoustic fencing necessary, they could have requested it. Obviously they are requesting amended hours of operation, so I think there would have to be some form of evidence base to justify an additional measure. Thank you.
Councillor Mercer.
Very quickly, Chair, I want to say thanks to the residents for sticking at it. I know this has been a really difficult time, and I'm glad that we can feel that if this is approved, as I hope it will be as one of the other ward member, that this will bring things to a resolution. I also want to say thank you particularly to my ward partner who's done a lot of work on this, and to our environmental health and planning officers who've been very, very supportive in seeking to find a way through that seems to be a solution for everyone. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Councillor Trollope, yes.
Thank you, Chair. From what I've heard, I plan on supporting this motion, but I am curious. The speaker in support, looking at this document, Alex Mosley, mentioned that they're going to be having a new site. What I wanted to know, if the officers know the answer to this, is how much traffic is going to be diverted. How much, in terms of a percentage or in terms of any sort of measure at all, is going to be transferred from the current site to this new site. I mean, if nothing else, so the residents have some measure of what they have to look forward to.
We don't have any information about the new site, Councillor Trollope, or what level of operation will be moved there. That we're not aware of that. But it's not fundamental to the application before us today.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I'll come to you, Councillor Noel, then I'm going to come to the vote unless there's any other member wishing to speak. Okay, Councillor Noel.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a very quick question of the officers. Will these conditions of operating times be carried forward to the new tenant? Is there a way we can make sure they carry on?
If granted, it's on the land, so that if there's a new operator, they would have to abide by those conditions.
Great. Okay, that's very good. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm going to move to vote this one, and the recommendation is to approve planning permission subject to the appropriate conditions as noted in the committee report. All those in favour, please show, and understanding that Councillor Raby and Councillor Mercer cannot vote.
That's unanimous.
Okay, therefore the recommendation has been approved. Thank you. Members of the public who wish to leave may do so. You're welcome to stay if you so wish, but
You're Magnus Magnuson.
I am. What's the new chap? Okay, thank you very much. Just to make members aware, as we've started this item within 3 hours, we therefore had to conclude it, and there will be no vote on this as whether we need to continue. Okay, so moving on to item number 8, which is DC 251329 Priory Field Barn, Monastery Lane, Storrington. Could the officer please make the presentation to committee?
So this application has been subject to an addendum following the agenda publication, the content of which will be detailed in the presentation. Additionally, officers advise members that the recommendation to the application will need to be amended to impose an additional planning condition to secure compliance with the Building Regulations Part G optional technical standard, currently 110 litres per person per day. The reason for that is to demonstrate water neutrality. So this is a proposed self-build barn conversion to a one-bed dwelling. It's located adjacent to, but outside the built-up area of Storrington, south of Kidhurst Lane. The site's accessed via an existing private track and relates to a modern barn approved in 2018, as shown on the slide. As now shown on the slide, the site is part of the wider Priory estate, and the applicant has confirmed volunteering activities on the site have ceased, and the associated items that were stored in the barn have been relocated elsewhere within the estate. The site has planning history, and a key relevant material planning consideration being the appeal decision in 2025. In that decision, a quote of which is on the slide, the inspector acknowledged the site's location on the edge of the built-up area boundary and the absence of allocation, but concluded that the proposal was acceptable in principle. In fact, the only reasons why that appeal did not succeed was insufficient ecological site survey and on water neutrality. So on the former, the current application is submitted by an up-to-date walkover survey with sufficient ecology information submitted. There are conditions to deal with mitigation and enhancement measures with no concerns raised by the ecologist. On the latter, water neutrality, subject to compliance with that new additional condition for the Part G technical standard, the proposal receives a favourable appropriate assessment under the Habitat Regs. Under that quote of the appeal, there's a comparison of the barn conversion proposals. As evident, the proposal set at appeal and now submitted is essentially the same scheme. The conclusions reached at the appeal equally apply now. The application is therefore recommended for approval as per the committee report, with the additional planning condition to secure the 110 litres per person per day.
Sorry, I was taking note. I'd like to invite the first public speaker, which is Mark Payne. And you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Chair, councillors and officers, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Mark Payne and I live at Norbert House on Kithurst Lane, which is one of the closest properties to the application site. This application relates to a building approved in 2018 under application DC 18-1695 as a storage barn. What was actually built did not comply with that permission. The building included 3 roof lights on the south elevation, 2 gable end windows on the east and west elevations, a first floor, and 2 roller-style garage doors on the west side. None of these elements were shown on or approved by the original plans. As a result, enforcement notice EN 210021 was issued to deal with the unauthorised gable end windows and roof lights. That notice required their complete structural removal. Whilst there is some evidence to suggest that the 3 roof lights have been removed, the gable end windows have simply been boarded over in direct contravention of the enforcement notice. One can only assume in anticipation of this application being approved. The site has been subject to a series of enforcement notices, some of which were closed, complied with, or dismissed on appeal. Despite this, the unauthorised works that led to those notices are still material planning considerations and provide important context. In total, 7 enforcement notices relate to this site and constrain the proposal before you. I'm concerned that the site's enforcement history has been omitted from the officer's report. Without this context, members are not being given a full and accurate picture of the site and cannot, in my view, make a fully informed decision. As the barn has not been built in accordance with the approved plans, I believe this application is an attempt to regularise an unauthorised development. I would urge members to refuse the application or at very least defer it to allow proper consideration of the issues I have raised. The council's lack of a 5-year housing land supply should not reward a pattern of disregard for planning rules. Unauthorised development must be treated as such, not used as a starting point to make it lawful later on. I am concerned this latest application relates to a building that wasn't built to the plan submitted and that, if approved, it could leave the authority open to legal challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite Roland Watkins, please. And you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you to the Chair and members of the committee for allowing me for the opportunity to speak at this meeting. My name is Roland Watkins. I live at Sill Hill House on Kithurst Lane. I'm speaking in regard to DC 251329, change of use volunteer agricultural storage barn to 1 residential unit, objecting to its proposal. In addition to other objections already communicated with the committee, I'd like to bring up 3 issues in my objection, namely residential amenity, highways impacts, and the conversion of the barn itself. There is an issue regarding residential amenity. The height of the land in the existing barn sits on a much higher level compared to the first half of Kithurst Lane, up to and including Furbank, which also sits opposite the agricultural entrance to the site which the barn resides. In addition, the height of the barn of the existing barn itself, which is a metre beyond approved specification, is under an existing enforcement action, meaning the barn effectively overlooks several properties on Kithurst Lane. This overlook impacts residential amenity for residents of the lane in unacceptable ways. The carrying of sound across the lane, together with light pollution to other residents. The upper floor of the existing barn includes 2 first-floor gable windows, since boarded up in contravention of enforcement notices. Unboarding these windows, especially the west-facing window, would enable first-floor views into many residences on Kithurst Lane. Highway issues are also an ongoing issue within Storrington, and lanes are used to bypass the A283 rat runs for those who do not live in the villages. Kithurst Lane itself starts at the intersection with 2 other roads, Monastery Lane and School Lane. All 3 lanes are wide enough for 1 vehicle in either direction. These 2 roads are frequently used by drivers to attempt to bypass Storrington A283 traffic, creating additional choke points on almost a daily basis. These roads also have a significant number of pedestrians walking on them, and Kithurst Lane contains a footpath leading up to the South Downs National Park. Due to their physical limits, congestion on these lanes can grind to a halt during peak traffic through Storrington. This is a real and known issue that residents have to accept and live with each day. While it may seem that allowing a single residence will not be consequential, it will only make access to the site via local lanes more challenging. As noted in the application, access to the barn is made off Kithurst Lane, not Monastery Lane, via a single track. Due to the history of the area, local attendance at the Roman Catholic Church, much of the base of Kithurst Lane is affected by poor, unregulated parking, which severely affects access to Kithurst Lane several times a week. I lastly question the suitability and sustainability of converting an agricultural barn into a single residence in terms of ability to retrofit installation effectively and therefore be fit for continuous occupation by 2 volunteers as outlined in the addendum submitted by the applicant. I urge the committee to refuse the application since there are considerations not previously raised that directly affect local residents close to the barn. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'd like to invite the first ward councillor, which is Councillor Emma Beard. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair, members. Priory Field Barn sits at one of the most sensitive thresholds in Storrington. Beyond the 2 churches, the village begins to dissolve into open space. And within 240 metres lies the boundary of South Downs National Park. This is a place defined by quiet lanes, dark skies and distinctly rural character. It's not simply another development plot. The context explains the strength of the local feeling. The site has a planning history. Previous proposals were refused and dismissed at appeal. Storrington and Sunnington Parish Council has objected again, and residents have raised concerns about design, loss of amenity, light pollution, highway safety and overdevelopment. These concerns are not abstract. They reflect a fear that incremental change here could erode the very qualities that makes this edge a special place, and to erode the dark skies that make South Downs National Park an international dark skies reserve. So special. The current proposal is materially different from the 2024 scheme considered and dismissed by the Planning Inspectorate of Appeal. The number of windows has increased from 11 to 17 by 6 additional openings, 3 at the east and 3 at the west end. While these may appear modest on paper, the effect is to move the building away from a simple agricultural conversion towards a more domestic, suburban character, which is out of keeping with the surroundings. More glazing means more light spill, and which will have an impact on the South Downs National Park dark skies and cause harm to wildlife, insects, reptiles, amphibians, birds, and mammals, including bats. More light equals a greater impact on the surrounding landscape and fauna. The South Downs National Park dark skies technical advice is clear. New development close to the National Park must minimise both external and internal light pollution and must demonstrate the light will not spill beyond the immediate site. This application contains no such strategy. There is no Lux contour plan, no assessment of the escape of internal light from the roof lights, and no controls on luminous or hours of use. In locations like this, that omission is fundamental. Equally fundamental is the unresolved issue of access. The application does not identify the exact route of an access road, apart from that it will start via the track towards the vineyard at Matt's Wood, also known as Matt's Meadow. Parking arrangements are not shown. These are huge omissions of what is a full planning application. As a result, West Sussex County Council Highways have been unable to comment. Members are therefore being asked to make a planning decision without knowing how the site would actually be reached to on a day-to-day basis. This is not a minor technicality. It goes to the heart of safety and amenity. These lanes are narrow and shared with pedestrians, dog walkers, horse riders and cars. They are already under pressure. Without clarity on access and parking, the committee cannot properly weigh out the impacts. Members, this is about balance. I recognise the widening housing context, but we are talking about a one-bedroom house here, so the impact on housing needs will be minimal. Due to its sensitive location, the site demands extreme care. Approving today without the missing information would risk harm to the dark skies, biodiversity, rural character and highway safety. The responsible course is to defer this application until a full lighting strategy and clear access details are provided. I urge you to take that prudent step so that any decision is based on evidence, not assumption. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite Councillor Claudia Fisher, Ward Councillor. And you have 5 minutes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. To be clear, my preference would be for the committee to refuse this application today, but I'm at least asking you to defer it because 2 critical elements remain unresolved: lighting impacts and access arrangements. Without that information, the committee cannot possibly make a sound judgment. First, glazing and dark skies. Compared with the 2024 scheme, this proposal includes 6 additional windows, 3 at each end. My view is it should, on that basis alone, be refused. The cumulative effect is a substantial increase of roughly a third, from 11 to 17 in potential light spill, and a significantly more domestic, urbanising appearance. Given the site's proximity to the South Downs National Park, this is a major difference to the previously refused proposal. I strongly disagree with the officer who states that this application and I believe that this application is not the same as the application from 2024. The South Downs National Park Dark Night Skies guidance requires development near the national park to demonstrate that lighting, both external and internal, will not degrade sky quality. It calls for downward directed fittings, minimal luminance and explicit assessment of roof lights and other upward facing glazing. None of that is before us. There's no lighting strategy, no lux contour plan and no mitigation for internal light from roof lights, such as low transmittance glass or blackout blinds. Interestingly, Horsham District Council has previously required robust lighting conditions at Stenning under DC 21-2233 and DC 25-1138 because of its proximity to the South Downs National Park boundary. Surely this should set a precedent. This site is even more sensitive, yet we have less information and no conditions. Second, access and parking. This application fails to identify a fully defined vehicular route, apart from that it will be via the track towards the vineyard at Matswood. The photo, which we've seen in the pack, shows a sloping driveway up to a field. There is no route defined from the gate to the property. No information about the proposed surface. Parking and turning provision is not shown. Because of this uncertainty, West Sussex County Council Highways have been unable to comment. Members are therefore being asked to approve a dwelling without knowing exactly how vehicles will access the house, what surface the access will have, where the residents will park, or what conflicts may arise on these narrow rural lanes. In my view, this is not acceptable. Highway safety and residential amenity are core planning considerations, and until this is fixed on a plan, any decision would be speculative. I therefore ask the committee to refuse or at least defer the application and require a full dark skies compliant lighting strategy, external lighting details and luminance, a lux contour plan to the boundary, mitigation for roof lights including low transmittance glazing and blackout lines, as well as full definitive access and parking information, identification of the vehicle route right up to the property, swept path and visibility assessment, parking layout, turning provision, and a formal reconsultation with West Sussex County Council Highways. Only once that information is provided can the committee properly balance the benefits of one dwelling against the risk to incredibly sensitive landscape character, dark skies and highway safety. Deferral is not delay for its own sake, it's responsible decision making. So just to recap, this current proposal is materially different from the 2024 scheme dismissed at appeal, with a 1/3 increase in glazing affecting character and dark skies. The site lies in a highly sensitive location in close proximity to the South Downs National Park, and access arrangements are only sketchily addressed, preventing proper assessment of highway and amenity impacts. I therefore ask the committee to conclude that a decision today would not be based on adequate evidence. While refusal would be best, at the very least, deferral will allow the gathering of proportionate information so that members can reach a robust and defensible determination. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll just revert to my earlier slide. And move on to this one, which indicates what is the material difference between the two schemes, the additional upper floor fenestration. So that's material difference. It doesn't, in your officer's view, translate to material harm to render the scheme unacceptable now. Even with those additional upper floor glazing openings, the external alterations are considered sympathetic. They still retain the form and the architectural interpretation of the barn. As before, to the appeal scheme, the conservation officer raises no harm to heritage assets. And like previously in the appeal scheme, the low-key level of occupation activity and use of the access, building orientation and siting would still avoid adverse neighbour impact and highway concerns. And similarly to the appeal, the proposal does not result in adverse harms to landscape and visual qualities, including the South Downs National Park settings. On that point, I'll just qualify through another slide about the lighting. So what was partly read out was requirements of the National Park dark skies policies. They only apply to the dark skies of the National Park. It's a different local plan. So the impact setting qualities have been considered, and they remain, in our view, low-key and discreet in nature for officers. In terms of access, it's already there. They're using the access, and there are conditions 7 to deal with car parking layout. There's condition 9, hard and soft landscaping, so that would capture the material and design of the hard standing. And also we have condition 14, which in perpetuity removes permitted development rights for any additional hard standing. So those matters are all recognised, but they're not considered to change the officer recommendation.
Okay, thank you very much. Any member of the committee wishing to comment on this? Yep. Councillor Gregg.
Thanks, Chair. We've heard tonight from both of my fellow ward councillors. I'm speaking tonight not only as a planning committee member, not only as Storrington and Washington ward member, but also as Horsham District Council's representative at the South Downs National Park. As such, I'm acutely aware of the importance of the South Downs National Park dark sky policy and how honouring it when it comes to allowing new development means ensuring that new development in or near the park should be mindful of keeping dark skies dark. So I'm surprised that there's only one mention of the national park in the committee report and mention only of back sensitive lighting, nothing about dark skies. I'm also very disappointed that this application, a one-bedroom house, has come to us with the windows increased by nearly 1/3, from 11 to 17. I've heard all of the arguments and can confirm that I fully support my fellow ward councillors' call for this application to be, at best, refused on the basis of the increased urbanisation from the extra windows and lights village at such a close proximity to the South Downs National Park boundary and International Dark Skies Reserve, or at least deferred till a full and extensive lighting mitigation plan is formulated and pending an adequate plan to be included for access and parking, unless, of course, this committee can formulate sufficiently strong conditions to cover both areas of concern. I do find it odd that an incomplete application such as this can be brought to us for determination. This is a sensitive site, a couple of 100 metres from the edge of the South Downs National Park. It has a very long planning history. Many neighbours have expressed concerns. It is outside the built-up area boundary, and the parish council have objected. I'm interested to hear the views of this committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, I will come back to you later, Councillor Gregg. Any member wishing to comment on this? Councillor Trollope?
I would be interested in the officer's views on the actual impact of these additional windows. I don't know very much about this dark sky policy or the, but I struggle. It's one house, and I realize there's a cumulative effect. I'm also, what difference will these windows actually make? Will it be actually something that somebody looking at the stars would suddenly say, I can't see the stars anymore? I don't know, and it's purely, I need a professional opinion as to what the actual impact is.
Yeah, so going back to the 2025 appeal decision, which is obviously the key material consideration in terms of judging this scheme, the inspector was making that decision in the context of the national park being in existence. We have the same local plan, South Downs National Park local plan. We have the same protected landscape policies under our HDPF. We believe we have the same neighbourhood plan and all the local context to that. And the inspector did not consider that the development would result in any material harm to dark skies. We don't have a dark skies policy standalone like the national park. The requirements that are set out in that policy don't apply to our development plan because it's a different plan entirely. We do have to give regard to the setting qualities of the national park, but in terms of the fact that these windows are not directed upward and outward, so when the room is lit, these new windows I'm talking about, the ones that is the only different material difference between this and the appeal decision, it's very difficult to see how these would materially exacerbate light pollution beyond the appeal scheme as baseline. In terms of the distance to neighbours, so I don't think, can you bring the screen up?
It's behind you.
Oh, sorry. So on this one, the zoomed in version, we got sufficient distance alone to avoid any direct loss of privacy or overlooking from any of the windows.
Sorry, I didn't see on the photo. Is there any potential mitigation from the trees that are on the property or bushes or any sort of natural foliage that would reduce the impact or mitigate it?
I mean, yeah, there is vegetation on the site, but also to the boundaries and around. But I mean, the point is that even if the vegetation didn't exist, the distance alone wouldn't cause unacceptable amenity harm by overlooking a loss of privacy because of the orientation and the direction of the buildings and the distance between the buildings. What you can't get the level and degree of invasive views into private habitable space, which is a policy test of unacceptability in terms of amenity impact, would not arise here.
Okay, and one final question, and then I'm done, and it's a quick one. I'm conscious of the cumulative effect. Would your thinking be the same if there were 1,000 houses being built with the same sort of going from 6 to 9 windows versus just the one? I just want to establish the principle, that's all. And I think you're going to say no, but I just want to make sure.
Well, I think what I'll say is that's not what we're discussing, but
It's the principle, though. I just want the principle of the cumulative effect. That's all I'm trying to attest. It's one house, you know. For me, I can't get beyond
yeah,
that.
I sort of see what you're getting at in terms of the impact arising from this scale of development compared to, say, a housing estate that's off Ravenscroft, which the neighbourhood plan allocated, which is going to be even closer to the national park boundary with modern housing, which is bound to have roof lights. Yeah.
Councillor Livingston, then I'll come to you, Councillor Knoll.
Looking at the planning history for this site, it's quite extensive. And this barn's been built for volunteers. Now, where have these volunteers gone now? Why was it built, and now why is it not needed? It's not very clear. This just seems like a way to get around the rules. If you build a barn for a use and suddenly declare it's not required, the cemetery's still there, the fields are still there. So why aren't the volunteers? Well, they've gone. I think we've been, dare I say, led up the garden path here. Thank you.
All I would say is I'm very familiar with the planning history of this site. But ultimately we have appeal inspectors that allow the principle of the development. The applicant has stated that the volunteers no longer use it, but ultimately the inspector has already considered this use is acceptable in this location. Obviously we've got some slight changes here which we've discussed, but ultimately that's your significant material consideration. So I know what you're saying, Councillor Livingstone, but I think it is not a fundamental point in where we are with the planning history right now.
Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry. Should there be a requirement to consult South Downs National Park on this one with regard to the dark skies policy?
So, procedurally wise, discretion is with us, because there's not a requirement that just because it abuts the boundary, we need to consult them, and we would only consult them on developments of certain scale, which, for example, major applications. We wouldn't consult them on developments of this nature.
Could I just ask further, so because it's a minor application, there's no requirement for dark skies to be implemented? Yeah.
Firstly, there's no requirement to consult them, and even if you consult them, they may not comment because clearly their focus will be on larger schemes. But secondly, the actual dark skies policy is specific to the South Downs National Park local plan rather than our local plan. We clearly have to consider the setting of the national park as part of that, but that specific policy and the requirements within it, which my colleague showed on the screen, are within the South Downs local plan, not our local plan.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Croker.
Thank you, Chair. So just taking that last point on board, although before I get there, I'm afraid I disagree with the officer. This is a materially different to what was before the planning inspectorate in the previous appeal, as far as I'm concerned, because of the amount of additional fenestration on both gable ends. I'm tempted to propose deferment on the basis of some sort of requirement to sort the lighting out to the extent that it will meet the South Downs requirements for dark skies, given its location within this very sensitive site. Obviously, this will require another member of the committee to second any such proposal. So I hand back to the committee.
I will come back to you in a moment, Councillor Croker.
Just want to be clear with members, we can't defer an application to require it to comply with a policy not in our local plan, because that's not our policy. So I think when you say comply with the dark skies, I think we need to understand what that means, because clearly it doesn't have to comply with that policy because that's not in our local plan. So what are we seeking as part of a deferral? And also the other point, obviously, to be mindful of, is that fundamental to the acceptability of the scheme? Because if it's not, you know, we need to proceed with timely decision making. Thank you.
Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. And once again, I'm just seeking to be clear. I mean, officers have had lots of involvement with the planning inspection history to this site. I understand that we have now got adequate details around biodiversity and ecology and also water neutrality. What I'd just like to hear again, please, is that in those appeals, I understand the inspectors identified a couple of really main issues that apply directly to this current proposal for a residential conversion. One is conflict with the development plan, and I understand the inspectors ruled that the location does not accord with the Horsham district planning framework because it sits outside the built-up area in an unsustainable rural location. And secondly, previous rulings emphasised that the residential development here would cause significant harm to the rural character of the area. A residential conversion with its associated domestic clutter would create the same harmful impact previously rejected by the inspectors. So how do we resolve, or how have we, in our minds, balanced those two very important and significant planning considerations?
Yeah. So the first consideration is on the slide. That's basically the summary of the inspector's reasoning and conclusion. I suppose I can read it out just for emphasis. So given the location of the site in close proximity to a range of services and facilities, and based on the individual merits of the scheme, the material considerations indicate that the location of development is acceptable, notwithstanding the conflict with the development plan. So I don't really see where the ambiguity is in that. That's quite a clear direction that's based on the merits of the scheme, and in terms of location, siting on the site, the scale of development, all of that is unchanged, and there was no conflict with identified with, sorry, the conflict with the development plan was identified, but nonetheless, the location was considered appropriate. On the second point, can you advise, sorry, where you've had the quote from the appeal decision?
I don't have that in front of me.
Because we
You
possibly...
was that the reason, our reason for refusal, was it, Councillor?
No, I was asking, I understood that there was a quote about it potentially causing significant harm to the rural character of the area.
We're just looking at the appeal decision now, because I understood that wasn't the case.
So in the main issues area, the inspector says the key issues are the appropriate location of housing, water neutrality, and ecology and biodiversity of the site. And then he goes on to discuss those three elements within the appeal decision. So we've talked about location. So obviously I'm just looking at it quickly here, but I'm not, you know, ultimately the inspector considered the location acceptable. There has been other, there's quite a big planning history around here, and there has been other proposals. I'm sure there was something for more houses, wasn't there?
Yeah, so not this site, but immediately adjacent, there have been various submissions say for 6 dwellings, which have been refused, both, well, I think delegated by delegated authority, and it may be that that's where that identification of harm's been drawn out.
Yeah, so in the conclusion, it talks about significant harm to the Arun Valley protected sites, but obviously that's in relation to water neutrality and the extraction from Prawlborough. So I think that there isn't anything, I think, in that appeal decision that would discusses that point or raises
So
concerns.
I suppose the forgive me, Chair, the drive of it is, are you satisfied that this residential conversion does not cause significant harm to the rural character of the area?
Yes, officers are satisfied.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Croker and Councillor Grett, come back to you, having heard the comments of the officers. Do you still wish to proceed with a motion or a deferral? Okay.
Having heard the comment from the head of planning, no, I won't proceed with that deferment. I'm still unhappy with it. I think Councillor Mercer made some good points. So I'm inclined not to support it for those reasons, because I regard it as a different application than that considered by the inspector.
Okay, therefore I will go to the vote. And the recommendation is to approve permission subject to appropriate conditions as noted in the committee report. Therefore, all those in favour, please show. That's me.
8 in favour.
Those against?
1 against.
Any abstentions?
And 3 abstentions.
Okay, therefore the recommendation as per the committee report has been approved. Thank you. So item number 9, no urgent business. So finally, I'd like to thank the officers for their presentation and guidance and the support from the Vice Chair and for the members for their contribution. Yes.
I really don't care about this, but it did go over 3 hours. I just want to make sure that the vote is still technical.
I
even though it
did,
was
sorry,
after 3 hours.
sorry, I did explain.
Oh, sorry, my
I'll
apologies.
reiterate it, that because we started before the 3-hour period and we need to conclude it, we didn't need
I'm
to
sorry,
go
I
vote
misunderstood
to
you at the
vote.
time.
Okay, so finally, I'd like to thank the officers for their presentation and guidance, along with that of the Vice Chair this evening, and members for your involvement and strong contribution this evening, and wish you all a safe journey home. And at 8:20:38, I bring the meeting of the Planning Committee to a close. Thank you very much.